it has to be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, because it's the three of us as we were at that point.
For years, the Bee Gees were untouchable, an unstoppable trio whose voices seemed to echo from another world. They didn't just sing, they soared. Their music lit up dance floors, stormed charts, and carved their names into pop history. But behind those legendary harmonies was something far more fragile. A brotherhood forged in poverty, strained by fame, and bound by secrets. Now, Barry Gibb, the last Bee Gee standing, has decided it's time to talk and reveal the truth about his brothers. And what he reveals doesn't shine with nostalgia, neither does it comfort. It cuts. This isn't just a story about music. It's about what happens when the world crowns you kings, and the crown gets too heavy. Before the spotlights, before the gold records, before it all went wrong, there were three boys, one dream, and a bond that no one thought could break. The birth of a musical brotherhood. Long before the glitz and glamour of gold records and sold-out arenas, the Gibb brothers were simply survivors. Their journey didn't begin in the flashing lights of fame, but in the flickering shadows of hardship. Guided by grit, love, and an unshakable belief in the power of music, Barry and twins Maurice and Robin were born into a world still reeling from the aftermath of World War II. Their father, Hugh Gibb, was a struggling bandleader, a man whose musical talent far outpaced his opportunities. With gigs few and far between in post-war Manchester, Hugh poured every ounce of his passion into his children, teaching them not just how to play instruments or sing in harmony, but how to use music as both an outlet and a lifeline. Their mother, Barbara, stood as the emotional bedrock of the family, nurturing her boys' imaginations while navigating the relentless grind of poverty. In search of a better life, the Gibbs made a fateful decision in the late 1950s. They would leave England behind and emigrate to Australia. The journey to Redcliffe, a coastal suburb near Brisbane, was not paved with promises of luxury. Instead, it was a leap of desperation, a shot in the dark. They arrived with almost nothing, no steady income, no safety net. During one brutal winter, they were forced to endure the cold without heating. To stay warm, they wrapped themselves in newspaper, huddling together against the biting chill. Their dreams, their only insulation from despair. But even in the bleakest moments, music remained their beacon. The Gibb brothers found solace and unity in their harmonies, discovering a shared voice that seemed almost supernatural in its cohesion. They began performing wherever they could, on street corners, in parks, and most notably, at the Brisbane Speedway. Amid the roar of engines and the haze of beer, they sang to audiences of drunks, gamblers, and thrill-seekers, often earning just enough for a loaf of bread or a can of beans. Their earliest songs, scribbled in tattered school notebooks, were hauntingly mature, lyrics filled with aching loneliness, fleeting hope, and dreams that always seemed just out of reach. Then came a twist of fate. A local disc jockey named Bill Gates, not to be confused with the tech mogul, heard something undeniable in the boys' raw, melodic power. He helped introduce them to the wider world, guiding them toward a new identity. The name Bee Gees wasn't merely an abbreviation of Brothers Gibb. It was also a quiet tribute to the people who had believed in them from the start. Bill Gates, Speedway promoter Bill Good, and their father, Hugh Gibb. Emboldened by this early recognition, the brothers made a bold, almost reckless decision in 1967. They returned to England to chase stardom, armed with little more than their harmonies and a suitcase full of demo tapes. They landed in London virtually penniless, strangers in the of their birth. But their timing was perfect. The British music scene was on the verge of a renaissance, hungry for new voices and new stories. Their first international single, New York Mining Disaster 1941, announced the arrival of a new force in pop music. A trio that sounded like one soul split into three voices. What no one could have imagined then, least of all Barry, was that the unbreakable bond they shared would one day unravel behind closed doors. And now, Barry is finally revealing the painful truths that fame, family, and time tried to bury. Truths that began to surface just as their soul-stirring sound was setting the world on fire. But not without a cost, at the pinnacle of fame and fortune. With the release of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, the Gibb brothers ascended to a level of superstardom few artists had reached. The album became a global phenomenon, selling over 40 million copies and embedding itself in the DNA of the decade. Songs like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love became anthems of the time, pulsing through nightclubs and into the soul of a generation. Songs that still resonate today, amassing over 2 billion views on YouTube nearly 50 years later. For a moment, they were untouchable, three brothers from the Isle of Man who had conquered the world. But behind the shimmering curtain of fame and success, the foundation was beginning to crack. Fame, as it often does, came with a heavy toll. The Bee Gees were thrust into an unforgiving spotlight. and the pressure to maintain their position at the top began to wear on their brotherly bond. Maurice, once the glue that held the group together with his lighthearted humor, began drinking heavily. Alcohol dulled the edges of the growing tension, but slowly eroded his health and relationships. Robin, always the most introspective of the three, grew increasingly withdrawn. The spotlight turned harsh on him, and he spiraled into bouts of paranoia and anxiety, feeling overshadowed and unheard. Barry, the eldest and often seen as the group's de facto leader, bore the burden of keeping the machine running. With his charismatic presence and distinctive falsetto, he became the face and voice of the Bee Gees. But while he projected control to the world, privately, he was unraveling. The responsibility of managing the band's creative output and public image weighed heavily on him. He found himself trapped in a cycle of perfectionism, always pushing for the next hit, the next tour, the next reinvention. The brothers' astronomical success allowed them to live lavishly. They bought sprawling estates in Miami, secluded mansions in England, and held on to their roots with a retreat on the Isle of Man. But their wealth attracted more than luxury. It drew in opportunists. Managers, producers, and hangers-on began to orbit the band, whispering in ears, sowing division, and manipulating loyalties. What began as a tight-knit family band slowly morphed into a fractured enterprise teetering under corporate influence. Creative disagreements soon became personal. Barry, emboldened by his central role in their recent success, began insisting on lead vocals for most tracks, believing his voice was the band's signature. Robin, feeling increasingly sidelined, secretly started working on solo material, hoping to reclaim his voice, literally and figuratively. Maurice, caught in the middle, retreated further into alcohol, struggling to reconcile his role as mediator with his growing personal demons. The unspoken resentment simmered for years, masked by smiles in interviews and synchronized performances on stage. But under the surface, trust was eroding. Eventually, the tension that had been building behind the scenes became impossible to contain. Private arguments turned into public spats. Recording sessions grew hostile. Decisions were made in isolation, and the once sacred brotherhood began to crumble under the weight of fame, ego, and exhaustion. Now, in this shocking interview, Barry would admit that behind the glittering success lay truths too painful to face at the time. Truths that he can no longer keep to himself. By 1969, the cracks had widened into a devastating chasm. The final straw came during the production of Odessa. When creative disagreements turned personal, Robin believed his artistic contributions were being dismissed, and his voice drowned out by Barry's rising influence. Then came the explosion. In a fiery and very public departure, Robin quit the band. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't cordial. It was a war. He lashed out, calling Barry domineering and controlling, and accusing Maurice of being passive, unwilling to take a stand. Barry fired back in interviews, describing Robin as unstable, impulsive, and consumed by his own ego. What had once been a tight-knit brotherhood was now splashed across tabloid headlines in a bitter family feud. Robin quickly set out on a solo path, determined to prove he could succeed on his own. He released Saved by the Bell, a haunting orchestral ballad that became an international hit. It was both a triumph and a warning shot. He didn't need the Bee Gees to succeed. Barry and Morris responded in kind, pressing on with the Bee Gees name. The result was Cucumber Castle, an album that veered into a more theatrical soft rock territory. They even filmed a surreal TV special under the same title. But without Robin, the magic was fractured. Critics were lukewarm. Fans were divided. For over a year, the brothers didn't speak. Interviews became battlegrounds. Robin gave bitter sound bites, calling the Bee Gees a musical dictatorship, with Barry as its unchallenged ruler. Barry, in turn, called Robin's actions a betrayal, not just of the band, but of their family. Behind closed doors, the consequences were darker still. Maurice, caught between his two warring brothers, began to unravel. He turned to alcohol with increasing frequency, numbing himself with endless bottles until he blacked out. His once playful personality dimmed, replaced by erratic behavior and deepening depression. Their mother, Barbara Gibb, watched helplessly as the family she had nurtured began to disintegrate. She pleaded with her sons, through phone calls, letters, tearful visits, to find a way back to each other. But pride and pain kept them apart. Then, everything nearly fell apart. In early 1970, Barry collapsed from exhaustion during a recording session. His health had deteriorated under the stress of the split. The relentless work and the emotional toll, that scare, combined with their mother's continued urging, brought the three brothers together for a private, long overdue meeting. It was tense. It was raw, but something in that moment, seeing Barry pale and weakened, confronting the damage they had all suffered, cracked the walls of ego and blame. Slowly, cautiously, the brothers agreed to reunite. In August 1970, the Bee Gees officially reformed. They returned to the studio, and in 1971, released 2 years on, with the poignant track Lonely Days marking their comeback. Fans rejoiced. The industry breathed a sigh of relief. But inside the group, the scars remained. The reunion was real. But the wounds hadn't fully healed. Trust had been fractured. Bitterness lingered beneath the surface. And though they would go on to reinvent themselves spectacularly in the disco era, the events of 1969 left fault lines that would tremble again in the years to come. The Bee Gees' solo paths and comebacks. By the dawn of the 1980s, the Bee Gees, once kings of disco and pop royalty, found themselves under siege. The very genre that had catapulted them to global superstardom had become a target. Disco was declared dead. Radio stations launched disco demolition events, and the Bee Gees, with their unmistakable falsettos and Saturday Night Fever legacy, became the face of a cultural backlash. Almost overnight, their songs vanished from the airwaves, and the brothers were forced to retreat from the spotlight. But they didn't disappear. Instead, they transformed. Behind closed studio doors, the Bee Gees reinvented themselves as quiet architects of pop music's next chapter. Barry Gibb leaned into his signature falsetto and became a sought-after collaborator. In 1983, he gifted Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton the now iconic Islands in the Stream, a song he'd originally intended for Marvin Gaye. It became a global sensation, a testament to the Bee Gees' enduring magic, even if their names were no longer front and center. Maurice and Robin, meanwhile, focused on songwriting and production. They penned hits for artists like Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, and Dionne Warwick. Their melodies and lyrics, still rich with emotional depth and pop sensibility, kept flowing. Yet, behind their creative resurgence, darkness loomed. Their youngest sibling, Andy Gibb, had once appeared poised to surpass them all. With a boyish charm, good looks, and a honeyed voice, Andy rocketed to solo stardom in the late 70s with hits like Shadow Dancing and I Just Wanna Be Your Everything, both written by his older brothers. But Andy was plagued by a gnawing insecurity that fame only amplified. He began to rely on cocaine, first as a crutch, then as a necessity. As his addiction deepened, his career unraveled. The Gibb brothers tried everything. They staged interventions, paid for multiple stints in rehab, and spent countless hours talking to Andy, pleading with him to get clean. At times, he showed promise. There were stretches of sobriety, glimmers of hope, but the grip of addiction was relentless. On March 10, 1988, just 5 days after his 30th birthday, Andy Gibb died. Officially, the cause was myocarditis, a heart condition likely exacerbated by years of substance misuse. Unofficially, the family knew Andy had been broken long before his heart gave out. The loss devastated the family. Robin, who had always shared a quiet, intense bond with Andy, was racked with guilt. He blamed himself for not doing more, not seeing the signs sooner. Maurice, already struggling with his own demons, descended further into alcohol and substance misuse. Barry, the family's stoic leader, immersed himself in music, using it as both a shield and a salve. Privately, he grieved deeply, often breaking down in tears during recording sessions. In 1991, Maurice finally hit rock bottom. After waking up in a jail cell following a blackout, he checked himself into rehab. It was a turning point, one that may have saved his life, but the emotional scars never fully healed. Robin, on the other hand, quietly battled ailments, including digestive and immune system disorders. He downplayed them to the public, maintaining a front of strength even as his body betrayed him. Though the Bee Gees continued to make music into the 1990s and early 2000s, the aura of tragedy never left them. Fame had once given them everything: glory, riches, legions of fans, but peace remained elusive. As the years passed, Barry carried the weight of those losses in silence. But now, for the first time, he's beginning to speak openly about what really happened. Stories long buried beneath the spotlight and the soundtracks of their lives. The 2000s unraveled into a slow-motion funeral for the Gibb brothers. It began in January 2003. Maurice, the vibrant and often playful heart of the Bee Gees, died suddenly from a twisted intestine. One moment he was joking with doctors in the hospital. The next he was gone. The shock was seismic. Barry, who had always been the steady hand, the leader, was blindsided. It was like someone just unplugged me, he later confessed. The world had lost a musical legend, but Barry had lost his twin flame, his brother in blood and sound. Robin, the enigmatic and often soulful twin brother, was devastated. He spiraled into grief in a way no one around him could quite stop or even understand. Yet even in his sorrow, Robin kept pushing forward, burying himself in music, in motion. anything to avoid the weight of stillness. But time and fate had other plans. After a long and secret battle with cancer, one he chose to fight mostly in silence, Robin passed away in 2012. His death didn't come with the suddenness of Maurice's, but it cut just as deep, maybe even deeper. Barry was left alone, the last surviving Gibb brother of the original four, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Each death left a void, an ache that couldn't be filled. Not with music, not with memory. Barry would often retreat into Maurice's old recording booth, sitting in the very chair his brother had once occupied. There he would listen to unreleased vocal tracks, ghosts preserved in sound. Sometimes he wept, sometimes he just sat still, as if hoping his brother's voice might speak to him again through the speakers. More than 2 decades later, Barry would still find himself standing at Andy's grave, whispering into the wind. He admitted to speaking aloud, asking for forgiveness. For what? Even he wasn't entirely sure. Maybe for being the only one to survive. Maybe for not seeing the signs. Maybe for not saving any of them. Maybe for all of it. For years, Barry held tightly to a vow of silence. He rarely spoke of the losses, the heartbreak, or the bitterness that sometimes came with surviving when those you loved most did not. But eventually, the silence became too heavy, too thick, and Barry, for the first time in decades, finally broke his silence. And it wasn't good. Barry Gibb breaks his silence. In a recent breaking interview, viewers witnessed something far more powerful than a music retrospective. They saw a man unravel. Barry Gibb, 1/3 of the legendary Bee Gees, didn't come to recount fame or relive glory. Instead, he opened the vault to a lifetime of pain, much of it long buried beneath harmonies, spotlights, and chart-topping hits. "I can finally reveal this," Barry said quietly, almost as if confessing to himself. What emerged was not the confident frontman the world had always known, but a shattered brother, a grieving soul drowning in memory. One of the most heart-wrenching moments came when Barry spoke of his youngest brother, Andy. Barry's voice trembled as he recalled a night in Miami that would haunt him forever. Andy had called, his voice laced with panic, paranoia, and desperation. He was high, frightened, convinced that someone was out to get him. Barry raced to Andy's home and found him curled up inside a dark closet, sobbing, trembling, broken. "I just held him," Barry recalled. "He was our baby, and we let him die. I couldn't fix him. No one could." The rawness in his voice cracked through decades of silence, exposing a wound that had never healed. Barry's last conversation with Andy wasn't an easy one. He had tried some tough love, hoping to pull him out of his destructive spiral, but it only seemed to push Andy further away. A few days later, Andy was gone, but the pain did not stop there. Maurice Gibb's death haunted Barry in an entirely different way. Maurice, affectionately called Mo, was the heart of the Bee Gees, the unifier, the peacemaker, the brother who could cut through tension with a joke or calm the storm with a laugh. When Mo died suddenly in 2003, the foundation of Barry's world collapsed. "Mo was the glue," Barry said. Without him, everything just fell apart. The weight of that loss grew heavier when Barry discovered something he'd never shared before. A notebook hidden among Maurice's belongings filled with handwritten lyrics. But these weren't typical Bee Gees love songs. They were cries in ink, lines about isolation, despair, and unspoken sadness. Barry never told Maurice he had read them, and now it was too late. That silence became another burden he carried. Robin's passing in 2012 reopened every scar. Their relationship had always been complex, intense, and creative, but also combative. In later years, the two had drifted, clashing over the band's direction, over legacy, over control. Their last exchange ended in anger, harsh words. A phone call slammed down. Barry never called back. "And then he was gone," Barry whispered. "That's my burden. I carry it every day. I never got to say I was sorry. I never got to say goodbye." He wondered aloud why Robin had kept his cancer diagnosis a secret, why he hadn't confided in him. It distressed him that, even in their final moments, they hadn't been on good terms. It was the same with Maurice, he explained. They weren't really speaking when Maurice passed suddenly in 2003 during an operation. "Jesus," Barry sighed, almost in disbelief. "That's all my brothers." But perhaps the most painful truth Barry revealed was this. The rivalries, the egos, the jealousy. They didn't just strain the music, they poisoned the bond between them. Bit by bit, success became a battlefield. Every hit song masked a war behind the scenes. "Before we ever became famous," Barry said, his voice heavy with nostalgia, "those were the best times of our lives. There was no competition. It didn't matter who sang what. We were just brothers making music together." But as the years wore on, everything changed. The fame, the pressure, the constant drive for more. It all fueled a toxic dynamic. "We were jealous of each other," Barry admitted, his words cutting through the weight of the years. "Sometimes it got so bad I hated my brothers. I hated what we were doing to each other. Creative differences turned into grudges. Pride became a weapon. They kept score instead of keeping close. And by the time they realized how far they drifted, there was no time left to come back together. Death came while the wounds were still open. I thought we'd have time, Barry said, his voice cracking. I thought we'd fix it, but the anger lasted too long. And then it was too late. This is the part Barry Gibb never wanted to say out loud. This is why the truth isn't good. Because behind every Bee Gees hit, there was bitterness, silence, and pain. And now with his silence finally broken, the damage is no longer hidden. It's raw. It's real. And it's forever. But in finally speaking these truths, Barry has taken the first step towards something he once thought impossible. Healing, by laying bare the pain, the regrets, and the fractured love. He's no longer carrying it alone. The silence that once kept him prisoner has been broken. And in its place, maybe there's small chance for peace. Not just for Barry, but for the memory of the brothers he loved, fought with, lost, and still sings for. Legacy and longevity. The final chapter of Barry Gibb. Barry Gibb is the last Bee Gees standing, the only one left to tell the story. Over the years, he's become more than a music icon. He's a symbol of survival, of love, and of loss. Every time he takes the stage now, it's not just about performing. His voice, still strong and full of feeling, carries the weight of memories. The harmonies may be gone, but the echoes of Maurice, Robin, and Andy follow him wherever he goes. Barry doesn't often speak in detail about his brothers. When he does, he keeps it brief, like the memories are too fragile to touch. Even with the pain, Barry keeps their legacy alive. His recent work with artists like Dolly Parton and Brandi Carlile hasn't been about making a comeback. It's been about honoring what they built together. Songs like Words and Run to Me Now feel like tributes. One more way to keep his brothers close. In 2017, when Barry was knighted for his services to music, he didn't make it about himself. All he said was, for them. That moment, like so many others, wasn't a celebration. It was a promise to remember. Barry Gibb lives with the past every day. He's the last voice of a group that changed music forever. And now, after all these years, he's finally speaking the truth about what it really cost. What do you think about Barry's revelations? Feel free to share your comments with us in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.